The moment you start explaining your boundaries to someone who keeps crossing them, something subtle happens. You think you're being mature, calm, reasonable. But what you're really doing is revealing how much you're willing to tolerate. And the wrong people don't misunderstand your boundaries. They measure them. They watch how many times you'll repeat yourself. They calculate the cost of ignoring you, and if that cost is low, they'll cross the line again. Think about how many times you replayed the conversation afterward. I should have said it better. I should have been clearer. I should have stayed calmer. But the outcome never changes, because the problem was never your explanation. It was your expectation. Stoicism teaches something uncomfortable and freeing. You are responsible for your character, not for convincing others of it. You control your response, not their respect. The moment you stop negotiating your dignity is the moment your power begins returning. If you're here, it's because a part of you is tired of performing strength and ready to embody it. If you value clarity without cruelty, boundaries without bitterness, and discipline without drama, you're in the right place. Consider subscribing, not as a favor to this channel, but as a commitment to the version of you that refuses to live as a reaction ever again. Disrespect is not random, it is a test. When someone interrupts you again and again, makes subtle jokes about you in front of others, dismisses your opinions, or keeps pushing your boundaries in small but deliberate ways, they are not simply careless. They are observing. They are collecting information. They are asking a quiet question without ever saying it out loud. How far can I go with this person? And the way you respond becomes their answer. Most people assume disrespect is emotional. They think it comes from anger, misunderstanding, or stress. Sometimes it does, but often it is strategic. It is a probe, a small push to measure resistance. If there is no resistance, the push becomes stronger next time. Think about the last moment someone crossed a line with you. Maybe they spoke over you in a meeting. Maybe they laughed at something personal you shared. Maybe they made you feel small in a room full of people. What did you do? Did you feel your heart race and fire back in anger? Did you try to explain yourself calmly so they would finally understand? Or did you lower your eyes and say nothing, hoping it would pass? Every reaction teaches them something. Anger shows them you are emotionally invested. Silence shows them you fear conflict. Long explanations show them that you want approval. And wanting approval is the easiest handle to grab. Much of the pain you feel in these moments is not only the insult itself, but the story you tell yourself about what it means. That story drives your reaction, and your reaction becomes the blueprint they study. Need is leverage. The moment someone senses that you need them to see you as good, reasonable, or worthy, the balance shifts. You may believe that if you explain your side clearly enough, they will finally respect you. But if respect depended on explanation, it would have appeared by now. When you over-explain, you are not strengthening your boundary. You are softening it. You are saying, without meaning to, that your limit is open for discussion. That is why the disrespect continues. It is not confusion. It is feedback. The more you react in predictable ways, the more predictable you become. And predictability gives control to the other person. This is where a quiet internal shift begins. Instead of reacting like a student being graded, you begin observing like the examiner. You start noticing patterns. You stop asking, why are they doing this to me? And start asking, what are they trying to gain from this? Attention, superiority, a reaction. Once you see the pattern, your emotional temperature changes. You are no longer trapped in the moment. You are outside of it, studying it. When you pause, even for a few seconds, you interrupt the test. You stop giving instant data. There is strength in that pause. Not dramatic strength, quiet strength. The kind that does not need to prove itself. When someone makes a cutting remark and you do not rush to defend yourself, something subtle happens. You are not submitting. You are evaluating. You are deciding whether the comment deserves entry into your mind at all. When you truly understand that, disrespect loses some of its edge. It becomes information rather than injury. You begin to see that the person testing you is revealing more about themselves than about you. Still, the discomfort remains, because sometimes their words land close to an insecurity you already carry. That is why certain insults sting, while others feel meaningless. Carl Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." When someone's disrespect hits deeply, it often touches a wound you have not fully healed. Recognizing that is not weakness, it is clarity. If you know where your sensitive spots are, you become harder to manipulate. You no longer react from surprise. You respond from awareness. So the real shift is not about crafting better comebacks. It is about changing your internal posture. You stop entering interactions hoping to be validated. You stop assuming fairness will protect you. You begin to see social dynamics as exchanges of energy. When someone disrespects you, they are offering a transaction. They provoke, hoping to purchase a reaction. If you give them anger, apology, or desperation, the transaction is complete. They feel powerful. But when you respond with calm observation or with simple facts, the transaction fails. The energy they expected does not arrive. That absence speaks louder than any argument. This does not mean becoming cold or unkind. It means becoming deliberate. You choose when to engage and when to disengage. You answer with clarity, not with emotion. If someone says you never help, you state what you have done. If someone says you are too sensitive, you acknowledge their opinion without adopting it. You do not try to convince. You do not try to win. You hold your ground quietly. Over time, this consistency changes how you are perceived. The test loses its reward. And this is where the deeper theme emerges. Disrespect only continues where it finds access. When you stop reacting automatically, when you stop explaining your worth, when you stop needing the other person to understand you, the dynamic shifts. It may not change overnight. They may push harder at first, testing again to see if the old response returns. But if your internal posture remains steady, the pattern breaks. You are no longer participating in the script they wrote for you. You are writing your own. And once you begin responding like the examiner instead of the student, the test no longer has the same power over you. The first shift is clinical detachment. Not coldness, not cruelty, detachment. There is a difference, and it matters. Coldness is emotional shutdown. Cruelty is revenge. Detachment is clarity. It is the ability to step half a step back inside your own mind and observe what is happening without being swallowed by it. Imagine a scientist standing in a lab, watching a reaction inside a glass container. The chemicals bubble, the colors change, the reaction grows intense. But the scientist does not panic. The scientist does not take it personally. They observe, they record, they adjust. That posture is what you are building within yourself. The next time someone disrespects you, notice the first impulse that rises. The mind wants to ask, how could they do this to me? That question keeps you at the center of the storm. Instead, gently replace it with another. What are they trying to extract? Attention? Validation? Control? A reaction? When you shift the focus from your wounded pride to the mechanics of the interaction, something subtle happens. The emotional temperature drops. You begin to see the behavior as a strategy rather than a personal attack. And once you see strategy, you can respond strategically. This is where the calm begins. When you stop seeing the other person as an enemy and start seeing them as a pattern, the chaos loses its grip. Patterns are predictable. Patterns can be studied. Patterns can be managed. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That strength is not loud. It does not argue. It does not prove. It simply refuses to surrender the inner space where decisions are made. Disrespect may still occur, but it no longer owns your reaction. There is a paradox hidden here. The moment you stop trying to be understood, you become harder to provoke. When you no longer need the other person to validate your character, their words lose their hook. Many conflicts continue because one side desperately wants acknowledgement. They want to be seen as right, fair, or good. That desire is human, but it is also leverage. When someone senses that you need their approval, they hold the power. When you release that need, the balance shifts. You are no longer bargaining for respect. You are deciding how much access they receive. This does not mean you become silent or passive. Detachment is not weakness, it is control. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." That reaction is the only territory you truly govern. When someone raises their voice, you lower yours. When someone pushes for drama, you respond with facts. When someone throws accusations, you examine them calmly before deciding whether they deserve a reply at all. The power is not in the words you choose, but in the steadiness behind them. At first, this steadiness may feel unnatural. You are used to reacting quickly, defending yourself, explaining your intentions. Clinical detachment interrupts that reflex. It creates a pause, and in that pause, you see more clearly. You begin to recognize the repeated moves, the same jokes, the same triggers, the same attempts to draw you into a predictable role. Carl Jung observed, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Many people believe their repeated conflicts are bad luck. In truth, they are patterns. When you become conscious of the pattern, you step out of the script. But here is the part that unsettles most people. When you detach, the other person may escalate. When the usual reaction disappears, they press harder. It is like pressing an elevator button that does not light up. You press it again, then again, more forcefully. In relationships, this can look like sharper words, louder accusations, or more dramatic behavior. The escalation is not proof that detachment failed. It is proof that the old reward system is breaking. The pattern is searching for its former payoff. This stage requires discipline. If you return to your old reaction during escalation, the test resets. The pattern learns that it only needed to push harder. But if you remain steady, the energy shifts. The person realizes that the usual methods no longer produce the desired result. They may not admit it, they may never speak of it, but they feel it. The emotional hooks are not catching. The dynamic begins to lose its intensity. Clinical detachment also protects you from internal erosion. When you react impulsively, you often replay the moment later with regret. You think of what you should have said or done. Detachment reduces that inner noise. You respond deliberately. Even if the other person remains difficult, you retain your self-respect. Over time, this posture becomes natural. You do not have to force calm. It is simply there. You listen, you evaluate, you choose. Disrespect may still appear, but it no longer defines the interaction. You are not fighting chaos anymore. You are studying it. And when you study it long enough, you begin to see that the real power was never in changing the other person. It was in mastering your own response. That mastery is the quiet center around which everything else turns. Once you build it, the next shift becomes clearer. You realize that detachment is not the end of the process, it is the foundation. From that steady ground, you can decide how much access someone receives, how much energy you invest, and whether the relationship itself deserves to continue. And that realization carries you naturally into the deeper transformation that follows. Yes. And that's the point. When you stop reacting the way you used to, you interrupt their reward system. For a long time, the pattern worked in their favor. They pressed the guilt button and you apologized. They provoked and you argued back. They criticized and you rushed to defend yourself. Each reaction gave them confirmation that the strategy was effective. It gave them energy, it gave them control. But when you remove the reaction, When you respond with calm instead of heat, something in the system breaks. The familiar loop stops producing results. And when that happens, the behavior does not disappear quietly. It intensifies. This is not a sign that you are failing. It is a sign that the old strategy no longer works. Think about pressing an elevator button that does not light up. You do not assume it is broken at first. You press it again, then again, more forcefully. You may even press it several times in frustration. Only when you are fully convinced that nothing is happening do you stop and take the stairs. Human behavior follows a similar pattern. When someone is used to gaining emotional reactions from you and suddenly receives nothing, they do not walk away immediately. They push harder, louder words, sharper accusations, more dramatic behavior. This spike is what psychologists call an extinction burst. In toxic dynamics, the extinction burst can look overwhelming. Rumors may start circulating. Old mistakes may be brought up again. You may be accused of being cold, selfish, or distant. The tone changes, the pressure increases, and this is the exact moment where most people fold. They interpret the escalation as proof that they made a mistake. They think, I made it worse, I should go back to how I was. But look closely, you did not make it worse, you made it ineffective. The pattern is struggling to survive without the reward it depended on. The difficulty of this stage is emotional. You feel the intensity rise, and your nervous system wants relief. It wants to restore peace quickly. Apologizing, arguing, or explaining might calm the situation in the short term. But it also resets the pattern. It teaches the other person that they simply needed to push harder to get the old reaction back. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." Remaining steady during escalation is not about revenge. It is about refusing to mirror the chaos placed in front of you. It is about protecting your own character when pressure rises. There is something powerful about realizing that escalation is predictable. It stops feeling personal and starts feeling mechanical. Carl Jung observed, "What you resist persists." When you resist their behavior with emotional force, you feed it. When you respond with clarity and restraint, you starve it. That does not mean you tolerate abuse or remain in harmful situations. It means that during the moment of pressure, you do not give the exact reaction the other person is hunting for. You stay centered. You speak simply. You limit your engagement to facts. And when necessary, you step away without drama. This is where inner discipline becomes visible. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Freedom in this context is not about controlling others. It is about mastering your own impulses when tension rises. Anyone can remain calm when things are easy. The real test is staying composed when accusations are loud and emotions run high. That composure sends a message more powerful than any argument. It signals that your behavior is no longer dictated by their mood. It shows that your boundaries are not dependent on their approval. Seneca wrote, "He who angers you conquers you." In the middle of an extinction burst, this line becomes practical advice. If someone escalates and you lose control, the old pattern wins. If someone escalates and you remain steady, the pattern begins to collapse. It may take time, it may require repetition, but human behavior adjusts when rewards disappear. Eventually, pressing the button repeatedly becomes exhausting. The person either changes tactics or moves on to an easier source of reaction. This stage often feels lonely because you are breaking a familiar rhythm. You may question yourself. You may feel misunderstood. But clarity grows in that space. You start to see how often your previous reactions were attempts to restore comfort rather than expressions of strength. You begin to recognize that real stability is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. It simply holds its ground. And here is the deeper realization. The extinction burst is not only about them, it is also about you. Your own habits protest when you change them. Your mind wants the old script because it is familiar. Remaining steady during escalation is as much about retraining yourself as it is about retraining the other person. With each calm response, you strengthen a new pattern inside your own character. Over time, the spike fades. The intensity loses its force. The person either adjusts to your new posture or seeks validation elsewhere, and you stand in a different position than before. Not louder, not harsher, just steadier. The escalation that once felt like proof of failure becomes evidence that you disrupted the old cycle. You did not make the situation worse, you made it unsustainable. And from that steady ground, you are ready to move into the next layer of change, where the focus shifts even more clearly inward. At this stage, your response becomes simpler, not louder. You reduce it to facts. Disrespect feeds on emotion, especially emotional language. Words like selfish, dramatic, lazy, useless, irresponsible. These are not descriptions of behavior. They are labels. They are meant to provoke. They are hooks thrown into your mind, hoping you will grab them and start pulling back. When you argue with labels, you enter their frame. You start debating your identity instead of addressing reality. And once the conversation shifts to identity, it becomes endless. Instead of arguing with adjectives, respond with what is concrete. If someone says, "You never help around here," the instinct is to defend yourself with a long explanation. You list everything you have done, hoping logic will restore fairness. But explanations often fuel the conflict because they show emotional investment. A steadier response is short and factual. "I did the dishes. They're in the rack." That is it. No tone, no heat. Just reality. If someone says, "You're too sensitive," you do not analyze your personality or justify your feelings. You pause, you look at them steadily and say, "That's your perspective." Then you return to what you were doing. The energy drops because you did not engage in the fight they prepared for. Notice the shift. You did not accept their label. You also did not attack theirs. You stepped out of the emotional exchange. Without friction, there is no fire. Most arguments continue because both sides supply fuel. When one side removes it, the flames lose strength. This is not about suppressing your voice. It is about choosing when and how to use it. There is strength in calm facts. There is authority in restraint. And there is power in refusing to argue about who you are. This approach feels almost too simple, and that is why it works. Complexity often masks insecurity. Long defenses, dramatic rebuttals, sarcastic comebacks, they all signal that something inside you is unsettled. When your response is measured and brief, it signals stability. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." When someone throws a label at you, the true disturbance begins in your interpretation. If you treat the label as a verdict, you react strongly. If you treat it as noise, you remain steady. Yet even with facts and calmness, some words still sting. That is where the deeper layer begins. Why does a simple insult sometimes feel like a personal attack on your entire identity? Why do certain phrases echo in your mind long after the conversation ends? The answer is uncomfortable. It is rarely about the present moment alone. It is about old doubts, quiet fears, and unhealed insecurities. Recognizing this does not mean agreeing with them. It means becoming aware of your own inner landscape. If someone calls you incompetent and it lingers for days, ask yourself what part of you feels uncertain. If someone calls you unlovable and it shakes you, notice where that fear already lived. The insult is a trigger, not the root. Once you see that, the words lose some of their power. They are no longer defining you, they are revealing you. And when you take responsibility for your own growth, you remove another layer of leverage from the interaction. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." That reaction includes what you choose to believe. When you know your strengths and weaknesses clearly, you are less likely to be destabilized by someone else's opinion. If there is truth in their criticism, you can correct it quietly. If there is no truth, you can let it pass. The key is that the decision happens within you, not under their pressure. Your calm response is not only a tactic, it reflects inner alignment. Over time, reducing your response to facts changes the dynamic. The other person begins to sense that their emotional tactics do not move you. The conversation becomes less dramatic because you refuse to dramatize it. This does not guarantee they will become kind or fair, but it does guarantee that you will not be pulled into unnecessary battles, and that steadiness begins to shape how others see you. They learn that labels do not stick easily. They learn that provocation does not produce entertainment. Still, facts are only one layer. Beneath them lies the question of worth. If your sense of value depends on constant validation, facts will feel like armor rather than confidence. The deeper work is building a self-concept that is not easily shaken. When you respect yourself, you no longer need to prove it in every argument. You become selective with your energy. You speak when necessary. You remain silent when it serves you. And your silence is not submission, it is choice. This is how the pattern begins to change from the inside out. You respond with reality. You examine your own reactions. You strengthen your internal foundation. Disrespect loses momentum because it no longer meets the same resistance or emotional charge. And as you continue practicing this steady posture, you realize that facts are not just a strategy. They are a reflection of something deeper taking shape within you. From that deeper ground, the next transformation becomes possible, one that shifts not only how you respond, but how you see yourself altogether. Because somewhere inside, you are afraid they might be right. That is the part no one likes to admit. If a stranger walked past you and called you something completely absurd, you would probably smile and keep walking. It would not land. It would not stay. But when a certain insult hits deeply, when it lingers in your thoughts long after the moment is over, it is not because the words were powerful. It is because they touched a quiet doubt you already carry. The sting does not come from their voice alone. It comes from the echo inside your own mind. Most people think strength is about having the perfect response ready, the sharp line, the clever comeback, the confident posture. But the deeper strength is less dramatic. It is internal clarity. When someone's words hurt, it is worth asking yourself, what part of you reacted so strongly? Was it a fear of not being good enough? A fear of being rejected? A fear of being seen as weak? The insult simply exposed what was already there. And once you see that, the situation shifts. You are no longer fighting just them. You are looking at yourself. Toxic individuals, whether consciously or not, are skilled at detecting insecurity. They test different words the way someone might tap on walls to find a hollow spot. They throw statements into the air and watch for the flinch. The reaction tells them where the wound is. If you become defensive, they know they found it. If you shrink, they know it matters. Over time, they learn which phrases trigger you, and they return to them. This is not magic, it is pattern recognition. They are responding to your signals. That is why the real armor is not a sharper tongue. It is self-acceptance. If you fully own your imperfections, they cannot be used against you. Imagine saying to yourself calmly and honestly, yes, I am still growing. Yes, I struggle in some areas. Yes, I am imperfect. Those statements are not weakness, they are ownership. And ownership removes leverage. When you accept your flaws privately, no one can shame you publicly with them. The insult loses voltage because there is nothing left to expose. This does not mean you stop improving. It means you stop pretending. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake in any thought or action, I shall gladly change." That is strength, the willingness to see your own flaws without collapsing under them. When criticism contains truth, you adjust. When it does not, you release it. Either way, your stability remains. The words of others become information rather than identity. Carl Jung once said, The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. That acceptance is not about arrogance, it is about integration. You are not only your strengths, you are also your fears, your habits, your mistakes. When you deny those parts, you make them fragile. When you accept them, you make them solid. The more integrated you are, the less reactive you become. The insult that once shook you now feels predictable. It touches the surface but does not break through. Epictetus taught that freedom begins in the mind. He said, "Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens." What is in your power is your judgment about yourself. If you decide your worth based on someone else's mood, you will always feel unstable. But if you ground your value in your own principles, in your effort, in your integrity, then outside opinions lose their authority. You stop chasing validation. You stop fearing rejection. You begin operating from internal approval. Seneca wrote, "He who angers you conquers you." The same applies to shame. He who shames you conquers you if you accept the shame. But if you examine it and find it empty, the attempt fails. The other person may continue speaking, but the emotional impact fades. You are no longer reacting from insecurity. You are responding from clarity. And clarity is quiet. It does not need to prove itself. Over time, this self-acceptance changes how you carry yourself. You speak differently. You move differently. You listen without panic. The need to defend every point decreases. You become less concerned with how you appear and more focused on who you are. That shift is subtle but powerful. Others sense it. They realize that their words do not land the same way. The old triggers no longer produce the same reaction. This is how the deeper transformation unfolds. You do not silence disrespect by overpowering it. You weaken it by removing its fuel. When your identity is not fragile, insults become light. When your value is self-defined, labels fall away. The dynamic changes because you changed. And this brings us back to the core idea that has been building quietly beneath everything. The real shift is not in controlling their behavior. It is in stabilizing your own sense of self so completely that their behavior loses its power over you. There is one internal decision that changes everything, and it is not dramatic. It does not involve a speech or a confrontation. It happens quietly, inside your own mind. You kill the hope that they will become different. This is the hardest part because hope feels noble. Hope feels patient. Hope feels loving. But in the wrong place, hope becomes a chain. As long as you secretly believe they will wake up one day, apologize sincerely, and transform into the person you wish they were, you remain emotionally invested in their potential. You keep explaining yourself because you hope they will finally understand. You keep arguing because you hope they will admit they were wrong. You keep waiting because you hope the version of them you once saw will return. That hope keeps you tied to a future that may never arrive. The problem is not kindness. The problem is illusion. When you look at someone through the lens of what they could be instead of what they consistently are, you distort reality. You excuse behavior that has already shown you its pattern. You downplay repeated disrespect because you believe the next conversation will be different, and each time it is not, the disappointment cuts deeper. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Much of that suffering comes from imagined change. You imagine the apology, you imagine the shift, you imagine the breakthrough. Reality remains steady, but your expectation creates pain. Letting go of that hope does not mean becoming bitter. It means becoming clear. It means looking at the person in front of you and saying internally, without anger, "This is who they are right now." You do not add extra meaning. You do not dramatize it. You simply accept it. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." He did not write that to become cynical. He wrote it to prepare his mind for reality. When you expect the storm to be a storm, you bring an umbrella. You do not stand in the rain demanding sunshine. That shift changes your posture. As long as you expect fairness from someone who has shown you otherwise, you continue trying to educate them. You keep presenting arguments. You keep offering evidence. You keep trying to win them over. But once you release the expectation that they will operate by your standards, you stop trying to convert them. You adjust your behavior instead. You limit access. You reduce emotional investment. You respond to actions, not to promises. The energy you once used to reform them returns to you. There is a quiet grief in this decision. It can feel like giving up. But it is not giving up on yourself. It is giving up on an illusion. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." When you see clearly who someone is, including their limitations, you are not condemning them. You are acknowledging the darkness that exists. Denial keeps you vulnerable. Awareness protects you. The moment you accept their pattern as real, you stop being surprised by it. Epictetus taught that freedom begins when you separate what you can control from what you cannot. You cannot control another person's character. You cannot force growth, insight, or accountability. You can only govern your own response. When you release the expectation of change, you free yourself from the cycle of disappointment. You no longer measure progress by their improvement. You measure it by your steadiness. That steadiness becomes your anchor. This decision happens once, but its effects ripple outward. You may still feel emotion. You may still feel moments of sadness or frustration, but the underlying attachment to their transformation is gone. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. You stop fantasizing about the day they will finally understand. You accept that their path is their responsibility, not yours. And in that acceptance, something in you relaxes. Life after this shift looks different. You become practical. If someone consistently disrespects you, you limit how much access they have to your time and energy. If someone repeatedly crosses a boundary, you reinforce it with action instead of explanation. You speak calmly. You step back when necessary. You stop trying to rescue the connection. Your peace becomes more important than their approval. This does not mean you stop caring about people. It means you stop chasing potential. You relate to what is real, and that clarity makes you stronger. The pattern of disrespect weakens because it no longer finds the same emotional grip. You are not waiting for fairness to appear. You are operating based on what is, not on what you wish would be. That quiet, internal, final decision is the once. It is not loud. It is not announced. It is simply chosen. And from that moment forward, your interactions carry a different energy. You are no longer negotiating your dignity. You are living as though it is already secure. And when that shift settles fully, the next question arises naturally. If you are no longer waiting for them to change, what will you now do with the freedom you have reclaimed? Once you make that internal decision, something practical begins to change. You become selective with your energy, not dramatic, not hostile, selective. You start to recognize that your attention, your warmth, your time, and your vulnerability are not unlimited resources. They are high-value assets, and like any valuable asset, they should not be handed to someone who repeatedly misuses them. For a long time, you may have given freely, believing that generosity would create fairness. But when generosity meets disregard, it turns into depletion. So you adjust. This adjustment is quiet. If someone disrespects you, access changes. Conversations become shorter. Engagement becomes practical. You respond to what is necessary and nothing more. You are polite, but not emotionally available. Calm, but not open in the same way. You stop volunteering stories, feelings, and details that can later be twisted or dismissed. It is not coldness, it is clarity. It is the recognition that connection requires mutual respect. Without it, the depth of connection decreases. At first, this may feel uncomfortable. You might worry that you are being distant or unkind, but there is a difference between kindness and overexposure. Aristotle wrote, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." When you know your limits, you protect them. You stop offering parts of yourself to people who treat them carelessly. This is not about revenge. It is about responsibility. You are responsible for the energy you invest and the standards you uphold. This shift is not punishment. It is protection. Punishment seeks to hurt the other person. Protection seeks to preserve yourself. From the outside, both can look similar because access decreases, but the intent is different, and that intent shapes your demeanor. When you are protecting rather than punishing, your tone remains steady. There is no bitterness. There is no need to explain. You simply adjust your behavior to match reality. You engage at the level that feels safe and respectful, and no deeper. Here is the interesting part. When people realize they can no longer trigger you, many of them stop trying. The reward they once received disappears. The jokes no longer provoke. The accusations no longer spark long debates. The drama no longer gains momentum. Some will quietly move on to easier targets where the reaction is guaranteed. Others will begin to show a different kind of respect. Not necessarily warmth, not necessarily admiration, but restraint. They sense that boundaries are no longer flexible. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." You do not need to threaten. You do not need to dominate. You do not need to raise your voice. You simply refuse to mirror the behavior placed in front of you. When someone senses that their tactics no longer produce emotional chaos, they recognize that the dynamic has changed. You are no longer participating in the same game. Carl Jung observed, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." When you stop negotiating your dignity, you move closer to that version of yourself. You stop shrinking to keep the peace. You stop expanding just to gain approval. You stand in your own shape. That steadiness is felt. It may not be praised, it may not be celebrated, but it is recognized. People sense when you are grounded in your own value. Mastery here does not mean suppressing emotion. It means choosing your response deliberately. When you become selective with your energy, you demonstrate that mastery. You decide where your time goes. You decide who receives your warmth. You decide how deeply someone can enter your world. That choice is power. Seneca once wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you." Selectivity naturally leads you in that direction. As you withdraw energy from draining dynamics, you create space. Space for healthier relationships. Space for personal growth. Space for calm. The absence of constant emotional turbulence reveals how much noise you were living with before. Peace begins to feel normal rather than rare. This is how the internal decision shows itself externally. You do not announce it. You do not argue about it. You live it. Conversations shift. Access shifts. Expectations shift. And over time, the entire pattern reshapes itself around your steadiness. Some connections may fade. Others may stabilize in a healthier form. Either way, you are no longer operating from hope, fear, or the need to be validated. You just have to mean it, not as a tactic, not as a temporary experiment, as a decision. Once you truly accept that people are who they consistently show themselves to be, once you stop bargaining for fairness, once your self-worth is no longer tied to their mood, the game changes. And it changes because you changed. Do this once, internally and fully, and the shift will be felt. Not because you demanded respect, but because you embodied it. Not because you fought harder, but because you stood firmer. And when you stand that way, toxic dynamics lose their leverage. The rest unfolds naturally from there. The day you stop explaining your worth is the day your life gets quieter. Not because the world suddenly becomes kinder, but because you finally become unshakable. You are no longer negotiating your dignity. You are no longer reacting to every provocation. You are standing in something solid, And when you stand that way long enough, the noise fades. If this spoke to something inside you, there's another video on the screen that goes even deeper into building that kind of inner strength. Watch that next. Keep sharpening your mind. Keep strengthening your character. And thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal.